to our Q&A session. Our guest today is Sharat Akhoury. Even though Sharat has 2 master's degree and he is a successful IT professional, he understands the importance of spiritual knowledge as a foundation of life. Is it true?
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
Yes. So, our question today is, what is the best way for a person to attain happiness?
That is a very important question. In life, we all try to strive to be happy, irrespective of the conditions that we're living in. And the fundamental aspect in all our objectives of activities is always to try to be happy. And that's the underlying thing. Whatever we do, whether it's to earn a living or to do some hobby, play a sport, read a book, our objective is always to pursue happiness. So what can we do to be happy, or how do we achieve that state of being happy? That's a fundamental question, and it's a very relevant question, as I just mentioned. And to actually go deeper into that, I think it's important we try to understand, is happiness a state of mind or is it a state of being? Now, what is the difference between these two? For example, if we take a video and if we just pause the video on one particular still, that can be equivalent to saying, that still is like a state of a position in the movie. Whereas if we take, the movie and for a series of stills, we continuously extract it with audio and we get a clip. That is analogous to a state of being, a single point in time versus a contiguous point in time. And what do we typically tend to gravitate to? Do we want to have a mindset where we're just happy in a moment, or we continuously happy over a large collective period of time? And that is what we should try to start meditate upon. Now, happiness can sort of be categorized under 2 main aspects. And I will come back to this state of mind versus state of being. I just want to branch off on another tangential topic. If we look at, happiness, we can derive this in 2 ways. There is material happiness, and then we also have transcendental happiness. A lot of us in our general day-to-day lives are more concerned about material happiness. So let's try and speak about this in a bit more detail. So material happiness comes, from 2 main aspects. We can think of material happiness as our physical and mental well-being. And we can also think of happiness relating to our emotional well-being. Now, maintaining balance and equilibrium across all these different states is very important. So another very important question that we must ask ourselves is, what makes us happy? Now, there are a multitude of responses that we can actually see people saying. For example, reading a book can bring happiness to a person. Listening to music, watching a movie, playing some games, sports, playing some musical instruments. For some people, money and wealth brings happiness, and for others, fame and recognition. So for every person has this concept of happiness that's very unique to them. Now, what happens when we don't actually, we do these things and we don't feel happiness inside? So now what happens when we don't actually, fulfill our happiness in these things? What checks us, what keeps us, from not attaining these various, states of happiness? And it's our innate ability of trying to make comparisons to others. We may be happy reading a book, or we may be happy playing some instrument, but the moment we see somebody else playing that instrument in a much better way, or somebody perhaps reading more books than us, or somebody accumulating more wealth, the moment we start making comparisons to others, it starts bringing us into a very negative state of existence. This state is actually what brings about envy. Now, when we start entertaining these thoughts of, I can play an instrument, but I can't play it as well as my friend or this person on YouTube or whoever it may be, this very element of comparison then actually draws us into some form of darkness. And it starts planting the seeds of envy. And the more and more we make these comparisons, the more we start, feeling less appreciative and less grateful for what we have. And, irrespective of whom we find ourselves comparing ourselves to, we'll always position ourselves in that state that there will always be somebody better who is capable of doing whatever it is better. And that's actually one of the biggest reasons for what starts, putting us in a position of frustration and sadness, resentment, and ultimately bringing about unhappiness in our lives. And it's very important that we realize that we're comparing ourselves, and we're not comparing ourselves to improve ourselves, but we're comparing ourselves because we start feeling that we're not good enough. And when we start feeling that we're not good enough, and we start cultivating the seeds, the weeds of envy, we start actually going into a place which is very unhealthy and very toxic. One may say that, how bad is envy? Well, the difference between envy and jealousy is one that is so subtle, but one that is so important to note. When we start getting envious of people, we get into a state in which we derive pleasure when we see others suffer. When we see, for example, a person who sings much better than us, all of a sudden they lose their voice, or they make a fool of themselves because they miss a note. And that brings us happiness. And it's important we stop and we take cognizance of what are we doing to ourselves.
How do we prevent ourselves from entertaining envy and making comparisons?
In spirituality, we can categorize happiness as material happiness or transcendental happiness. A lot of us tend to be drawn into the former, so I will speak about that first. Material happiness is conditional on the intrinsic and extrinsic elements in our lives. The intrinsic aspects comprise of all the things in our lives that we have direct control of, such as physical, emotional, and mental well-being. The extrinsic aspects comprise of things that lie outside of our jurisdiction of control, things such as the environment. So let's focus our attention on the intrinsic elements of happiness, or material happiness. So on the aspect of physical well-being, it's very important to lead a disciplined and regulated life. We must eat nutritious food. We must maintain a certain hours of sleep, have sort of good sleep hygiene. And it's so important to exercise. When we exercise, a simple activity such as walking, we're able to actually create our body's release dopamine and endorphins. These are the hormones which are known as the feel-good hormones. So by exercising, we actually release these endocrine changes which stimulate happiness from a physiological aspect. Not only do we start feeling more confident, but we actually start feeling more internally happy as well. So exercise is one of the fundamental aspects to physical well-being, but that does not go by its own. A lot of people argue of the 70-30 or 80-20 rule, where 70% of what we eat and 30% of what we do, or 80% of what we eat and 20% of what we do. And therefore, it's also very important to lead a regulated, nutritious lifestyle. If we find ourselves eating too much junk food, naturally we'll feel ourselves bereft of energy. We will feel ourselves, all those fats that we're consuming, those unhealthy elements, will start biasing our emotions and our physiological well-being. Versus if we eat some fruit, some vegetables, and some grains, these raw and beautiful ingredients can actually produce so much of energy within us and allow us to feel a bit more positive. Sleep is another very important aspect that requires a lot of importance. In our day-to-day life, we're often troubled with so much of stress and anxieties that we find ourselves almost swapping out sleep so that we can stress and be more anxious. And we need to realize the less sleep we have, the more impact it has on our well-being. So it's very important to actually lead those, three disciplines of sleeping, eating, and exercising. And those speak both all from a physical well-being as well as a mental well-being. Now, if we look at further into the mental well-being, it's also important to maintain a level of equilibrium in our work-life balance, in our social life balance, as well as our spirituality. If we start shifting the scales in any one particular side, we'll start seeing these other elements taking an impact. And initially, it might not feel that it's such a detrimental aspect. I can give you an example. Say you spend 3 hours watching a movie and you just spent 30 minutes, reading some holy scripture. And you do this on a regular basis. In 1 week, you may not know the difference, but in 5 years, regularly, you'll start noticing that all those hours you spent, dedicated in towards watching a movie versus, doing something which is a bit more uplifting, will start having an impact on you. So we need to maintain that equilibrium. Now, coming back to the question that you asked of how do we prevent ourselves from entertaining envy and making comparisons? There's a two-pronged approach that we can actually use to deal with this. And this two-pronged approach also addresses our emotional well-being. So just a bit earlier, I spoke about the importance of physical and mental well-being, but the third aspect, emotional well-being, this aspect actually speaks directly to that question of how do we prevent ourselves from entertaining envy, and how do we actually, stop comparing ourselves to other people. This two-pronged approach is something that's very practical and something that we should try to apply in our day-to-day lives. An attitude of servitude and an attitude of gratitude. Now, it's so easy and it's so easy to remember and so beautiful because it has this very rhyming mnemonic, right? An attitude of gratitude and an attitude of servitude. So an attitude of gratitude is, in essence, it starts the very basis of appreciating what we have in our lives, what's been given to us, and also not taking for granted the little aspects that we typically do. Being appreciative of our own skills, our own abilities, and being appreciative of all that we have can really help cultivate us into being a much better person, not only for ourselves, but for those around us. This attitude of gratitude starts cultivating our heart so that we can cleanse ourselves of things, these dirt of jealousy and greed and envy. When we start appreciating, the finer things in life, that simple things that, we're able to see, we're able to smell, we're able to walk. Some people are not so fortunate, but sometimes we become so overwhelmed by, I don't have a car as great as my neighbor, but we should be actually grateful that we have a car, and more so that we're able to drive it, more so we have the independence to actually drive that car. There's certain people in this world that may not have either the physical ability to do so or the financial means to do so. And the moment we start taking away the fact that we have this small aspect, we're actually torturing ourselves, and we shouldn't do that. Our own ability to read a book or to play an instrument is so commendable. There are others out there that may not have access to books or instruments. Or there might be others who are not so brave to pick up an instrument and start learning it. Whatever it may be, just starting to be appreciative of those finer aspects, it actually starts making us feel a bit more positive, a bit more optimistic from within. This element of gratitude also keeps us away from that greed and that weed of envy, where we start feeling happiness when others fail. In fact, we should reverse that. We should have appreciation for when we find others who are able to do better than us in something, whether it's playing a sport, whether it's acting, whether it's reading a book, or it may be in our professional capacity. By showing appreciation in others, we sort of become inspired. And in that inspiration, we can actually set better goals for ourselves to perhaps reach greater heights. And this element of setting goals by appreciating others, it helps us to check that state of vanity, that false state of pride. And that's such a beautiful thing. Now, the other aspect of, the servitude of gratitude, there's a very well-known aspect which has been termed in the psychology domain. It's the helper's high. And the helper's high is a beautiful concept that it's an actual physiological concept that when you go and provide help, when you provide assistance to others, you start feeling happiness from within. Now, from a physiological aspect, how does that happen? Well, the body starts producing a hormone known as serotonin. And this serotonin, this hormone is critical for us feeling more calm and peaceful. And it actually starts bringing, in this state of tranquility, happiness. And as serotonin starts increasing, the other important hormone within our endocrine system, cortisol, starts decreasing. Now, what is cortisol? A lot of us are familiar with cortisol, but its more colloquial name, stress. Cortisol is known as the stress hormone. So when we start helping others, that natural state of feeling peaceful and happiness arises from the physiological state where our body produces serotonin and starts reducing cortisol. Now that's in this sort of state where we start producing more and more serotonin, when we start helping more and more, we get to the state known as helper's high. So that's from a physiological aspect, but if we go a bit deeper into this aspect, what is it? What's actually happening? Well, we're positioning ourselves in a state where I am not so important. Serving myself is not so consequential. When you put yourself in a position where you're serving somebody else, what you're actually doing is you're saying that for that moment in time, the person whom you're serving is the focus of your attention. So you're thinking less of yourself. You're seeking a state of humility. And when you actually serve others, you're actually purifying your consciousness. Your consciousness is such an important aspect in your spirituality. The more we cleanse our consciousness, the more intrinsic happiness we start feeling. And that is a very important aspect. Now, in the very beginning, I spoke about material happiness versus transcendental happiness.
I think this is a good segue for me to ask you the difference between material and transcendental happiness.
Indeed, it is a good segue, because just now I spoke about purifying our consciousness. Consciousness is not bound to what we can see as the various modes of material nature. If we start thinking a bit deeper into this question, material happiness and transcendental happiness. What does the word transcendental mean? Transcendental, the root form, means to transcend. So something which is higher is transcendental. So when we think of materialness, material nature, a very subtle thing to understand is that anything that is related to matter is material. So whether it, in the concept of happiness, whether it's reading a book, playing an instrument, listening to something, these are typically connected with matter, and that is material happiness. Transcendental happiness is happiness which transcends matter, transcends the world that we're living in. So it sort of speaks about happiness at a much higher level. A lot of people may actually think that this higher level is associated to some, psychedelic, drugs or something, but no, that's not the type of high we're speaking about. Because once again, that type of high that one achieves is related to matter. It's material happiness. Transcendental happiness, as I said, transcends. So when we start, as I said, purifying our consciousness, we're able to connect to God, to a much higher cause, who is the creator of everything that we see, everything that we interact with. Now, happiness that we derive from that higher cause, that cause which is not connected directly to this matter, that is transcendental happiness. So some examples of transcendental happiness is when we're deep in meditation, and in our meditative trance, we start actually, enjoying or thinking about our relationship with that higher cause, with God. It brings within us a level of inner peace, a state of actual happiness. This happiness which is not comparable to some material aspect. That is an example of transcendental happiness. It may be when you're singing some hymns, some prayers of worship. You may actually enter a state of ecstasy where you feel so happy when you sing this glorification of God. That is another example of transcendental happiness. You're not singing a song about some material aspect, about how beautiful this girl that I once dated was, or you're not singing about this heartbreak that you suffered from. You're singing about the glorification of this higher cause, the cause of this manifestation, the cause of everything that we have, everything that we are. And when you start singing and glorifying that cause, that Supreme Personality of Godhead, and you start feeling that, or you start relishing that nectar of happiness, that is transcendental happiness.
For me, it's much easier to think about a boy than a supreme, because a boy, I can see him, I can even touch him and speak to him, but supreme, it's something for me like, I don't know about. What should I do?
Now, that's another very good question, because the way we tend to deal with our surroundings and the way we tend to interact with life in general is through our material senses, right? And sometimes it becomes very difficult to connect to that higher cause, to connect to God, because as you so rightly said, you can't see God, you can't touch him. And for majority of us, it feels like we can't even hear God, although he exists in the scriptures. And sometimes, actually most of the times, it's easier to sing a song about this guy or this girl or whoever it may be, because it's something that we can actually experience directly. And this is why it's actually very important. Now, I want to try to ask you, or put this in a slightly different way. That feeling that you may have towards that boy or that girl, is that feeling tangible? Can you touch that feeling? Can you see that feeling? Can you hear that feeling? Can you taste that feeling? It's a feeling from within, right? It's something that's actually not material. It's a feeling, it's a concept, right? So if we can develop this feeling for this boy or girl, then why can we not develop this feeling for this higher cause? Let's rewind a bit before that. Let's ask the question, how did we develop this feeling for this boy or girl? And that is perhaps a bit more of that question will actually develop in sort of insight into, how can we develop a feeling for God, or how can we develop these feelings of transcendental happiness? The way we develop this feeling for this person whom we adore, it may be not even a boy or girl, it can be our mother, our father, it may be our husband or wife, whoever it may be. This feeling was actually created because we try to learn more about this person. We would spend more time learning about their hobbies, what their likes are, what their dislikes are, what do they enjoy doing, who are they in general, what are their passions, what gets them going. The more we start learning about this person, the more we start appreciating them, and the more we start developing these feelings of love and adoration. But the important part is that, we learn more about that person. And the other aspect is we start serving that person. We would bring gifts for that person, or we would start cooking something that they like, or we would maybe write a song for them. We start exercising our ability to serve that person. And the more and more we serve the person, the more we intensify our feelings towards that person. And that's kind of what we need to do with God. This higher cause, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How can we develop feelings for God without learning more about Him? God has described Himself in the various scriptures that we may be acquainted to. And through His various representatives, He has actually revealed so much of detail about Himself. So when we actually position ourselves to go and read more about Him, to speak to those people who know, or perhaps those people who have relationships with Him, when we start cultivating this desire, this thirst of knowledge, I want to know who that Supreme Cause is, then we will also start building this feeling of love towards that higher cause. And when we start translating that feeling of knowledge and wanting to know more and start translating it to some physical manifestation of service, where you can serve, that higher cause, it initially may be through His representatives, and His representatives may be some bona fide spiritual master whom you can serve. Now that person is actually something that's very tangible, whom you can actually build a relationship with in the very first place. And the more and more you serve those who are close to God, those people who have relationships with God, then you too will start cultivating your own relationship with God. The more you cultivate your relationship with this higher cause, the more you'll start tasting this nectarian transcendental bliss. And the more you start relishing it, the more you'll start understanding that material happiness is transient. It's very temporary, whereas transcendental happiness is everlasting. It's not conditional on anything. It's permanent.
You said that material happiness is temporary. Can you explain this?
That's a very good question. I'm going to give a very simple example to explain this point. Let's say you go watch a soccer match, any sporting event, just for the purpose of this explanation, I'll use soccer because a lot of people connect with soccer. And your team is like the underdogs, for example. They may not be so good as the opposition. And for the first half, the score is 0-0. And you're so excited that, my team is doing so well. They haven't lost yet. And, the team goes into the change rooms, it's first half, and you're feeling so much of happiness, so much of bliss that, yes, we haven't yet lost this match. And then second half starts. And again, during the second half, almost towards the second half, this whole game is coming to an end. The scores remained 0-0. And you're so excited inside. Nobody believed that, not even you could believe that your team would maintain a draw with this very strong team. And right in the last minute, the 90th minute, the opposition goes and scores a goal. All of a sudden, all that happiness that you're feeling from within, it dissipates. It goes, it vanishes. So that happiness that you're experiencing for 89 minutes, your team was not losing, at least it was experiencing a draw. A small thing like the opposition going and scoring a goal completely destroyed that state of happiness. That's a very good example of how our happiness is so temporary, it's so transient. And this can actually extend, that anything that's connected to matter, that happiness is temporary. Sometimes we're thinking that I'm not happy because, I just have a 1-bedroom apartment. If I go earn more money, I can buy a house with maybe 3 bedrooms. So you work hard and hard and hard, and over some time you get that promotion, and with that promotion you get some more money, and you're able to afford not even a 3-bedroom, a 4-bedroom house. And after some time you start realizing that 4-bedroom house actually didn't give you happiness, because you're not able to enjoy it. There may be other aspects. You may feel that, there may be some car like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini that if I have this possession, I'll feel so happy. Again, you work so hard, you get this possession. It's what, as many people would say, it's my baby. And the moment you drive this car outside and somebody scratches it, that happiness that you're experiencing all of a sudden gets destroyed. Another example of how happiness in this modes of material nature are so temporary. They're so ephemeral. They're not long-lasting. This boy or this girl you love, all of a sudden they go and they find someone else. And you may be in a 2-year relationship, and all of a sudden that happiness gets destroyed when this person leaves you. So the moment we start associating our happiness with anything connected to matter, that happiness is always subject to an end, and that happiness is temporary.
Or I really want this transcendental happiness, not this material, short, temporary happiness. What should I do?
It's such an important question, and I think it actually builds upon all the things that we discussed. It's important to realize that transcendental happiness, it's not something that we can switch on and off, or it's not something that we can go and purchase, or we do and naturally it'll happen instantaneously. This transcendental happiness is sort of like an organic process. It's important to actually, as I said, work on first maintaining some equilibrium in our material lives. If we feel that we're in an environment where we cannot be happy first materialistically, then it'll be very difficult to try and even approach this higher level of happiness, this transcendental happiness. So the first aspect of actually getting to that transcendental bliss, is maintaining or that some level of equilibrium of material happiness. And by material happiness, it's not that you're going to go and try and find, some more wealth or something. It's about those things that I said: physical well-being, making sure you're exercising, you're sleeping well, you're eating well, nutritious foods, not junk foods. Because when your body is physically well, it starts creating a conducive environment for these other transcendental qualities, where you can build a relationship with that higher cause. When you're physically well, when you're mentally sound, when you're mentally doing good, you're on a platform where you can start thinking about and reading more and more about God and that higher cause. And also when you're emotionally in a very good place, it automatically becomes this very well fertilized ground where the seeds of transcendental bliss can actually be planted and can be cultivated. So it's very important to understand that we cannot just, almost instantaneously jump into that transcendental bliss. We need to make sure that first our physical, mental, emotional well-beings are taken care of. And the moment we take care of these, we're actually in a sort of equilibrium and a good conducive state to start understanding, learning, inquiring about God, and that is so important to position ourselves at that level. So how do we, attain transcendental bliss? All right, so once we've, attended to this material state, the second part comes in. When our mind is in a level that it feels peace, we're able to then go and read more about God. And as I said, how can we actually, feel or experience God in our lives? The same way we feel or experience that person whom we love and adore, we learn more about him. So we go and learn more, we inquire, but our mood of inquiring should be submissive. Submissive means that our inquiries are genuine. It's not that I want to know more about God so that I can put God down. No, it's in a state that I want to know more about God so that I can build a loving relationship with him. So we seek people who have actually mastered this very important aspect of spirituality. Those people who have become experts in cultivating their own relationship with God's. Now it's, just the same way if you want to learn an instrument or you want to be very good at a particular subject, you will seek out the expert in that particular subject or that particular field that you're trying to gain expertise in. It's important that we try to also do the same when we're trying to seek this transcendental happiness. We should try to seek knowledge from those who have experienced or who are continuously experiencing this transcendental happiness. And nowadays we see that a lot of people are coming up even on YouTube and the internet as self-professed masters of spirituality, and they may have a good level of followers, but we should be very careful as to whom we seek information from. The same way, if we are supposed to do a project, do we go and quote information from Wikipedia? We may, seek information from Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is not a bona fide or authentic source of knowledge. And that is because anybody can come and write what they feel about that subject. We should not try to seek sources which tell us what we want to hear. We should try to seek sources that tell us what we need to hear. And that is very important. So the same way that, seeking information from Wikipedia might not be the best and actually is not the best. And we should actually seek those people who are genuine, who are bona fide, those people whose only motive is to actually impart the knowledge that they have acquired through some genuine, authentic source. Then only can we actually, make progress towards developing this relationship with God and ultimately experiencing this transcendental happiness.
Thank you, Sharat Prabhu. A lot of information. You're a so knowledgeable person. I really like this. I took so much for myself. And can you give a bottom line, some remarks, please? Definitely.
If I can just have one thing for you to take away from this, this discussion, is cultivate that attitude of gratitude and the attitude of servitude. When you start serving others, try to aspire for getting that helper's high, and you'll start cultivating that ground, that heart, where you can start getting or experiencing that transcendental happiness. Thank you so much for having me on your YouTube channel where we discuss these various elements of spirituality. I feel so honored. I feel that I'm also on the path. I have not acquired happiness. I just want to honestly admit that. I think we're all struggling, but taking recognition of the fact that we're all struggling together. But we're all struggling because we're consumed in material happiness. Let's all strive together to relish that transcendental happiness. So thank you once again for having me, and I really enjoyed talking to you and sharing some insights that I have obtained from those people around me.
Thank you very much. I hope to see you again very soon.
I hope to see you soon. Thank you.